Cool, here we go. So first I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Mel. Mel is designs digital products and is a senior UX consultant based in Kansas City, Missouri. He's a lifelong student of design, having graduated from the Kansas City Art Institute with a degree in design. He has since spent 20 years in advertising, web, graphic, UI, and UX design. He shared that he also likes to dabble in comic books, illustrations, and writing, which is super fun. And he loves mentoring designers at all levels, including across many of our courses, such as Advanced Figma, which we will talk a little bit about today as well. One other thing that I would like to share with y'all is that we are having a special offer for folks who attend these sessions this week. So we are going to have $100 off any Design Lab course utilizing New Year 100. This code will expire on January 31st, 2025, but you can use it for any of our upcoming courses, including Advanced Figma, which is obviously relevant to this presentation, and we'll chat a little bit about as we finish up the session before our Q&A. So I'll share some information in the chat, but right now I'm going to hand it over to Mel for our chat. Again, hidden Figma roadblocks and how to navigate them. All right, Mel, all yours.
All right, thanks, Emily Ann, for that nice introduction. I was telling Emily Ann earlier that I cannot access my Google screens at the same time on this platform, so I'm going to have to kind of somewhat wing it in my Figma file a bit. So if I sound a little bit off or off the cuff, that's fine with me. That doesn't bother me. But just know that I'm not reading presenters' notes, which should make this a little less flat. A couple of caveats / notes. I tend to fly through information, and I'm going to consciously slow myself down. I love what I do, so I get a little bit excited about it, and I love talking about Figma and UX and design in general, so I get a little bit excited about it. I've actually gone to just straight water for my drink during this, so that I'm not any more amped up than I normally am on coffee. And also so that my throat doesn't get terribly, terribly dry. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, or attempt to, because we all know the fun of technology and how it doesn't necessarily always agree with what we'd like it to do. So I'm going to rely on it to do that right now. All right, so there we go. Hidden Figma roadblocks and how to navigate them. Another caveat, as I continue to make excuses rather than getting into the presentation, is that this is going to be a combination of shortcuts and challenges and plugins and various things that, as I've taught the Advanced Figma course with Design Lab, I've run into, and my students / mentees have run into as well. So hopefully you'll find this useful. I can't give away too much because we want you to take the course, obviously, but hopefully there's a lot of useful takeaways from this. So let's go ahead and get started. So I will navigate to my tape shortcuts, and we'll start off with some of my favorite Figma shortcuts. If I go too fast, just ping me in the chat, and I will slow down. Like I said, I'm consciously making an attempt to slow down here, which is not easy for me. All right, so first shortcut I love. So this shortcut, Control or Command K, this is like the One Ring in Lord of the Rings, if you're familiar with that. This is the one command to rule them all, or the one shortcut to rule them all. If you're not a big nerd like me, this is just your all-purpose shortcut. So if you do Command or Control K, depending on the platform you're on, you'll get this nifty little window, and you can access from this window your assets, your plugins and widgets, as well as Figma commands. If you're not super familiar with shortcuts in Figma, the great thing about this window is it shows them all right next to whatever you were to type in. So if I wanted to insert, for example, of course I pick one that doesn't necessarily, so let's say auto layout, right? Add auto layout shows me that Shift A is the shortcut for that. So love this command. Get used to using it. It will speed you up considerably when you're using Figma. All right, so on to the next one. Moving a selection from parent to child layer. I used this almost exclusively before Figma gave us the ability to select matching layers, which is still kind of a wonky command in Figma, so this one's still very useful. It's just a way to climb up and down the layer tree in your layers panel over here. So for example, I'm on this layer here, and I want to get down to the children. I simply hit return or enter, and now it exposes all of those. And then if I have more nesting in that layer, I hit it again, and it selects the children of that. Now to climb back up in the layer panel, you simply hold down Shift and hit enter again, and it takes you to your parent or grandparent layer. Super useful when you're working with like a table component or something like that that has a lot of nested components or nested layers inside of it, to just kind of drill down and be able to edit things on the fly. All right, so that is our moving up and down the layer tree, and we'll move to my next favorite shortcut. These are all favorites. Okay, so one of the things about Figma is a lot of times those of us who are old and came from Photoshop or Illustrator, and we want to lay something out very quickly, but we don't want the trappings of auto layout. This is a great one for that. It's just the old duplicate command, which you use by holding down your Option or Alt key, dragging your element, and then simply holding down Command or Control and hitting D. And it duplicates the element accordingly. It's not that dissimilar to Illustrator's transform each functionality, and it's just a quick way to lay something out and lay out duplicates of things. Like if you're using gray bars to represent your text in like a wireframe, this is a quick and dirty way to kind of duplicate those things. This one is super useful, and I don't know that this is documented very well anywhere, but a lot of times, going back to this idea of nested layers and nested elements within a component, just selecting down through that nest, if you hold down your Command or your Control key and simply drag over those elements, you can see that it will grab the elements inside of that frame. So this frame has 3 elements inside of it, 3 other frames or rectangles. And then if I drag over them, now I get to select them without drilling down into the frame. Where this comes in very useful is, say you had a few frames that were nested inside of another frame. And now I want to select this guy and this guy and this guy in 3 separate frames. I can do that, right? So it's a really quick way to just kind of drag over your elements and change them. Again, this comes in real handy when you're using a complex component, like a table component that has columns, that has multiple text fields in it that you want to change the text for. And we'll get into some of that functionality when we get into plugins. I'm going to pause and take a quick drink. Just trying to keep my throat from being parched here. Okay, open libraries. So if you hold down Option or Alt and 3, this will expose all the libraries that you have available, any updates that you have available to those libraries, as well as Figma's built-in UI kits. So it's a quick way to get into any libraries that you'd like to use in your file. Again, that's just Option or Alt 3. Let's move on to our next one. The scale tool. Now, this one was hidden from me for a long time. I didn't realize it existed because my mind didn't think, oh, let's use scale, because I'm used to like an Illustrator or Photoshop where it's a transform tool, right? So this is another tool that's very useful when you're doing a quick layout and you don't want to get into the trappings of auto layout while you're doing a quick layout. So if you just hit K, no Command or Control needed, it brings up this interface for scaling, right? So really useful. You can do it manually, and you can see the values change over on the right. You can change the anchor point, which is hugely useful. So I can scale out from the middle here, in theory. Is our anchor point not working? Well, my guess is that it's probably going to work if I do it from here, from the numbers. So there's a glitch in Figma that it doesn't allow you to drag from the anchor point. You can only do it here. But I do love that I can do 10 times, 4 times, 2 times, what have you, using that scale tool. So a little hidden one that isn't terribly obvious. And the other thing that's not terribly obvious is to go back to where you were before. You have to hit the escape key. And now you're back in the regular interface. So that's one that can be a bit of a gotcha when you're using the scale tool. So be mindful of that. I apologize that I'm not looking directly at my camera a lot, but I've got my Figma interface on my drawing tablet. So next, you've got inserting components, which is Shift-I. So you can search for any of your components. I don't have a lot in this file, but I do have some icons. And there they are. So you just type in the name of the component, and your icons or whatever your component elements are show up there. And then you can either drag them, select it, and hit insert, or you can just drag into it. Pretty simple stuff. All right. I think that might be our last shortcut. Yes. Okay. Another thing is this window will hang around. Sometimes you just hit escape to get rid of it. All right. Cool. So that is the take shortcuts section of the presentation. Now let's jump into auto layout, which is probably the biggest source of confusion for pretty much all of my mentees and students and other professionals I've worked with, because it's a trick to wrap your head around sometimes, because it's based, I think, loosely, not so loosely, on the CSS property, the flex layout property in CSS, if you're familiar with that. If you're not, don't worry about it. You don't need to be to get familiar with auto layout. I'm going to cover off on 3 aspects of auto layout that confound people, and that is a fixed layout, fixed layout, the fill layout, or the hug layout. So let's hop into those real quick. And please let me know if I'm moving too quickly, and I will slow down. All right. So imagine I've got a toy box. I collect Todd McFarlane's action figures. Todd McFarlane is a comic book artist, the richest comic book artist ever. He's worth like $600 million or something ridiculous like that. Not 300 million. Sorry. So I collect his action figures to add to that wealth. So here's my toy box with 3 of his action figures in it. Okay. And this one is set to, as you can see, hug. Hug basically means that it's going to hug the contents of that frame. So if I resize this frame, this is a good time to point out this gotcha. If you manually resize a frame, you lose your hug settings, which is really annoying in Figma. But there's a reason that they do it. The reason they do it that way is because Figma is assuming that if you're going to manually resize a frame, you're saying, I want this frame to be the specific size. So while it's frustrating if you're not accustomed to it, it does make sense logically. So if you look in this, the hug setting is basically each of these is a certain size. It counts all of those sizes and wraps the frame, hugs the frame around those. So now let's move on to fill. So fill is basically saying, whatever size these internal elements in the frame are, they should fill up the size of the frame. So let's just double check, make sure these are set. So I got this horizontal and vertical fill, horizontal and vertical fill, horizontal and vertical fill. You can see all those are there. So when I resize their parent frame, using that Shift-A to send me up to the top, now they will expand to fill that frame. Right? So that's a pretty easy one to understand. The last one is the easiest to understand, and it's just fixed, which means the elements within the frame stay the same size no matter what size the frame becomes. So those are 3 areas that almost all of my students and mentees get baffled by at times, largely because it can reset itself based on how you interact with the elements in your component or in your layout. Alrighty, so that is that. I'm trying to think if I missed anything in there. I don't believe so. There was another caveat that I wanted to point out that wasn't in my file, but I'll try and remember that and come back to it because I didn't include it in my file. All right. So let's talk briefly about variables in Figma. Now, if you don't know what variables are, this is where my presenter's notes could come in handy if I had access to them. So I'm going to just ad lib that a little bit. So one of the key things to understand is the difference between variables and styles in Figma. Variables in Figma give you a lot of flexibility for like when you're using design systems to have a way to change aspects of your design, colors, fonts, Boolean properties, which is yes or no, true or false, like those neat little switches that we get when we use components in Figma. So those variables are used to control that across an entire design system, and they're also used for what's known as design tokens, which is a way to abstract your variables. So you can have one color, for example, a light gray that you want to use for both your disabled text and you want to use it for like a background or an overlay. Well, to someone who's coming into your file who's not familiar with your how you're doing that, you can actually have in your design tokens, you can take that same color and you can rename it to be used in both, or you can reference it to be used for both your disabled text and for your overlay color without having two variables to reference for that. You have two variables, but they're both referencing the same color value. So that's where variables come in handy. I recommend using variables for pretty much everything. Styles, you can use, I think styles are a little bit easier to use when you're dealing with like text and font styles. But still, if you can abstract that into variables and design tokens, that's going to be a little easier to update and maintain when you're dealing with design systems or complex design files. And that's a great caveat for those is if you're just designing a website or something like that or a landing page, you don't need to dive deep in Figma and use variables. Unless you're going to be using that page, unless you're going to be using that page multiple times and you want the ability to change the look and feel of that page across several instances of it, and then that's where you might want to use variables. The other thing about variables is Figma recently did us all a favor. This is the variables panel, which you can get to by clicking this local variables. You have to have nothing selected on your canvas in order for that to show up. So click our local variables, and previously this window was just stuck to the side of the screen and you had to expand it this way, which was super annoying. But they recently fixed it so that you can put it wherever you want to on the screen, which is hugely helpful. So I thought I'd point that out for those. If you're still using Figma's old interface, which I hope you're not, because it will be sunset at some point. So go ahead and upgrade to the new UI, even if you're not super happy with the decisions they made on it, because you'll be left behind if you don't. All right, so that's variables. Do a quick time check. Excellent, excellent. Let's hop into components. All right, this is a main source of component confusion for people. Naming is so important in Figma, especially when it comes to components, because if you don't name your layers within components correctly, you will confuse Figma. And the more complex your components become, the more you will confuse it by not naming things consistently. So I will show you a very real world example of how that applies. So here we have a button. In this button, I've created an instant swap property. In this instant swap property, I have the option to select from two different icons. Now, I have overridden the color on the arrow icon component or instance. Notice that when I switch to the help icon, that override does not stay in place. That is because of naming. So if I go to both of my icon components and I drill into their layers, you'll see that for my arrow icon, this layer inside that contains the vector is called vector, where my help icon is called help. Now, All I have to do to make that consistent is change this to vector, and then we'll reset our button. And then I will go in and I will change the color on this arrow instance. And then when I go back into and I change my icon to the help button, now it maintains the color. That is something that will bite you in the behind almost every time if you don't do it correctly. And again, if you have multiple nested components and nested instances inside of a component, this can drive you to the brink of insanity if you don't do this correctly. So I highly recommend paying attention specifically in your components to how you name your layers, because you'll regret it if you don't. All right, and now we are almost to the last piece of this, which this is, from a timing standpoint, is going great. I will share with you some of my favorite plugins. Some are not super obvious, others you might be familiar with. Plugins are your friends. Get familiar with them. Plugins will help you do the work that Figma might not be able to work. Okay, Bridget, we will go into questions shortly. That's a great question. I'm happy to answer it for you here in a second. I am monitoring the chat because I don't know, it might be an ego thing. I don't know, but let's go into let's look into Data Studio to start. So again, the one command to rule them all. I called it Data Studio. It's actually called Data Lab. This is a paid component. If you want the Rolls-Royce version of it, that lets you update or upload your own data. But where this comes in super handy, I don't have my pro plan logged in right now. So let's go back to Data Lab. Run Data Lab. There we go. All right. So here's Data Lab. Should be fairly obvious what this does. If you've got a bunch of different text fields, I'll demo it real quick here just so you guys get an example. So let's say blah, and we'll have several blahs. I'll now use my handy dandy duplicate. I'll select all these guys. And then I'll come over here and I'll say, well, I want all of these, I want to paste names. So I got both genders, I got the language is English, I hit paste data, and now I've got names in there, right? Same thing applies for, let's select all these guys, holding down command, selecting them. Now let's change them to dates, right? So I've got all these different date formats, super helpful. I've got the time format, or I can say no time at all. I can set the start date, tell it the range, have it round by time. I can have it sort ascending or descending, etc. So we'll just keep it basic and hit paste data. And now I've got a bunch of rando dates for my the data that I'm going to use in there. Where it becomes really powerful is in the list functionality. I can select the data set, so you can upload your own data from Google Sheets, CBS, API, or JSON into your mockups. Super great when you're working with developers. They can set up the JSON so that your Figma files actually call data from your real world app into your designs. Oh, it's so beautiful. So I highly recommend checking that one out. For those of you who don't want to pony up the cash for that particular component, there's another component from Microsoft called Content Reel. Does a lot of the same things. So let's undelete my guys over here. So I can come over here. Let's do some frames so we can look at some images real quick. So grab that, duplicate again. Very likely that this is going to make it wrong, but let's go into avatars and see how it pastes avatars into each of those frames. Pretty cool, right? So you can do this with any type of images. So those are avatars female. Now it'll fill that with those photos. So people populate this with all sorts of things. Logos, right? Company logos. So super, super useful when you don't have data to work with, or actual data or content to work with. This is a great plugin to use. And when you sign in, you can start using your own data as well. So you can start creating data sets in here as well. So highly recommend that. That's called Content Reel again, and super useful. Pro Layout Panel. Okay, so you got the basic auto layout panel here. Pro Layout is like that panel. I don't want to say on crack, but that's the only thing I can think of to say. So, see, you've got all these various values. So all of the things that are hidden in this panel, but you have access to, are here. It's a paid as well, but some of these are worth their weight in gold when you're working. So you've got strokes, included, excluded, stacking, distributing. All of these things are settable in this Pro Layout panel. So I highly recommend checking that one out. Now on to Start. Let me do a quick time check. Boy, time flies when you're having fun. Start is an accessibility plugin. Again, I pay for it. It's worth it. They're doing a great job with constantly updating it. So you've got all this functionality in Start. You can check contrast. You can check typography, touch targets. I love the vision simulator. Let me sign in so I can show you guys this real quick. Give me just a sec. We'll see if I actually paid my Start bill this month. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, I'm signed in. That's my old presentation. Cool. All right, let's go back. And now let's do our vision simulator. So different color blindness, and you can generate examples of all of these various vision impairments. So you select a frame, and then I could say, all right, let's not get too crazy, but we'll do blurred, we'll do yellowing, loss of contrast, we'll hit generate, and it will give me all of these various ways of seeing that, which is great when you want to show like a PM or an executive of someone who you want to demonstrate, no, I can't use those colors together because they're not accessible. This is great to kind of show them that, right? There's also, you can simulate different levels of zoom with things. So let's select this guy. Come on, dude. All right. So 150. That one's not working. So let's see. There we go. So 150, 76. So lots of useful tools there. And then you can set up automatic monitoring in your file. I haven't played with that one too much, but this is a great tool for any accessibility nerds out there. All right. Onward. A free accessibility tool with about 1/3 of the functionality of Stark is Axe for Designers. This will do color contrast. It'll do an overall check. These guys, this company, I don't know how to pronounce that. I think it's DQ or DEC. They are accessibility gurus. Accessibility is going to be huge for UX designers. Should already be huge for you, but it's only going to become more of a consideration because if you think about it, companies are starting to realize that people who have accessibility challenges are customers too, and they're leaving all those customers out of their products by not considering accessibility. So learn as much as you can about accessibility. The last one is a super fun one. How many times have you guys had to insert a logo in one of your designs and had to search on the web to find the right SVG or a right version of a logo? So that's where brand fetch comes in. And it knows exactly what it says it does. So for example, but this one's really robust. So if I go into Google and I want to grab Google's brand, it gives me SVGs of all their logos, but it also gives me colors. It also gives me fonts. It also gives me images that are used within their brand. So this is really great when you have to use someone else's brand in your design just to make it look more professional or make it look more real for your stakeholders. So I highly recommend using brand fetch as well. All right, so those are my tips and tricks for Google. This is obviously my contact information if you want to screenshot that. So feel free to reach out to me after this if you have any questions. I love answering questions. I love chatting with people about this stuff. Obviously, I love talking about it because I'm already parched and I took one drink of water during this entire thing. So let's go ahead and jump into questions, and I'll just leave this screen up for now.
I'm going to jump in real quick, Mel, because I just want to share a little bit of information about Advanced Figma before we get into questions. So do you mind?
Oh, yeah, you said that.
Swap screen share real quick?
Yeah. Let me figure out how to stop sharing. Here we go.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
No.
All right. Here we go. Cool. All right. Whoops. Going the wrong way. Okay, so I want to share a little bit about Design Lab's course, Advanced Figma. We have a ton of advanced courses for designers, but obviously Advanced Figma is the most relevant to this particular presentation. So Advanced Figma is a 4-week course. It's suitable for mid to senior level product UX UI designers and requires approximately 4 to 6 hours per week and is primarily an asynchronous program, meaning you'll work through the curriculum, the project work largely on your own time, so it's meant to be quite flexible. But there is 1 hour-long live mentor session peer group every week. So essentially you'll meet with an expert mentor like Mel, as well as a small group of your peers that are also taking the course to chat through questions, have some dialogue, go over your work, etc. Tuition is $7.99, and the next start date is January 10th. Although if you take advantage of our code from this session, it will be $6.99. And the course is for anyone who has essentially a good baseline understanding of Figma, who wants to really deepen your understanding of some of the more advanced features that Figma has to offer and really work more effectively, efficiently, and collaboratively in the tool. In terms of what you'll learn on a week-to-week basis, the first week is focused on the use of auto layout. I heard Mel talking quite a bit about auto layout, managing things like flow direction, alignment padding, and really making sure that your contents containers can adapt in terms of your layouts. For week 2, you're going to be working on establishing icon systems for better integration across component libraries, building more robust components for UI elements like things, buttons, tags, and really straightforward properties so that you can start to really have things be more easily reusable amongst other designers and in your work. For week 3, you'll keep building on your knowledge of components, expand your library into a more comprehensive and robust system, and you're also going to explore some of the pros and cons of various approaches to building components like grids and tables. And then in week 4, you'll work on building color palettes that differentiate between base color values, semantic colors, component-specific colors, and really work to establish flexible and expressive systems for typographic styles to use through your designs across platforms and channels. So it's, as you can see, it's a really robust course. You learn a lot. This is one of our best-selling courses. We get fantastic feedback from it across the board. Great mentors like Mel participated in the mentorship with it. So it's really a lot of fun. And then I just wanted to share a couple testimonials. I wish I could have known everything I'm learning now 2 to 3 years ago. It's fantastic. No more YouTube videos that confuse me more than helping me. Well, I'm not a designer. I am a photographer. I can relate to that when it comes to Photoshop. I definitely recommend taking Advanced Figma. Being part of weekly live sessions made learning enjoyable and kept me motivated. My mentor, Evan, was incredibly encouraging along the way, helped answer my questions. I'm really excited to bring what I've learned back to my team to help supercharge my workflow. This is something we hear a lot from folks, that they start implementing what they're learning even when they're still in the course. And then lastly, I really enjoyed the way the course materials were offered, readings, videos, and then learning exercises, and then putting it all together in larger projects. So it's a really diversified content in the way that things are presented. All right, cool. So I am going to hand it back over to Mel. Mel, do you want to, is there anything else you need to screen share for, or should I just leave this up?
Finding my buttons again. Every meeting tool is slightly different. No, I don't have anything else to. Let me bring back up my contact info in case I don't get to some questions.
Sounds good.
Let's see. Share screen. This is the only time I feel like a tech newbie, is when I'm trying to share screens. All right, there we go. Cool. So let's go through some of the questions. There's some in chat, and there's some in questions. So let's start with the first one. Okay, yep. That one's been answered. Okay, Stella, to answer your question about the fastest way to learn Figma for animation. Figma's animation tools are okay. Um, Really, you just want to learn how to prototype in Figma, and that if you learn how to prototype and you dive into how to use like the is it called automatic or is it called not magic? Hold on, let's just look at it. I'm losing my language, so we'll just look real quick. So let's add an interaction just for fun, and that'll tell me what I need to know. All right, here we go. So yes, that would be animate in Figma, and then it'll show you a little example down here of each type of animation as you're setting it, which is really useful if you just want to roll over it. Easing equations are a really important thing to learn if you want to do a deep dive into animation. So to answer your question, you won't really learn animation per se in Figma. I would highly recommend learning the basic principles of animation and UI animation if you want to really understand and take a deep dive into animation. And then, not to sell other products other than Figma, but I learned most of what I know about animation by a combination of learning like hand drawn animation. I've done some of that, and there's a great Disney book about animation by the original 5 or 6. They call them the old men of Disney. That goes into like the core concepts of animation. So with Figma, Figma's not the place to start learning animation, but you can play with it and learn a little bit in Figma. Yeah, so that's the best answer I have for the fastest way to learn Figma for animation. There's also a plugin for a tool called, of course, I'm going to forget all this stuff while I'm thinking about it. What is it called? Lottie. Lottie files, Lottie animations, right? Look up Lottie files, and those are little animations that you can. There's a plugin for Lottie for Figma that allows you to take animations out of Figma and make them into Lottie animations. So look into Lottie files. I believe they have their own animation creation tool as well. So I hope that answers your question. Let's see. I thought I saw another plugin, Axe. Was this covered? Yeah, I did go over Axe, Susanna. It's kind of a scaled down accessibility plugin, but it's a good one if you want a free version. Okay, Paul, I've struggled with understanding variables and conditions since I think by conditions you might mean modes or you might mean conditional variables within Figma. Yeah, that's conditional logic is its own monster. You kind of have to dive a little bit into programming to understand conditional logic. It's always a confusing topic. Go slow and make constant notes while you're learning variables and conditions, and ping me if you have specific questions about those things. I'm happy to answer them. And the best way to ping me is if you've already started to solve a problem. Contact me if you've already started to solve a problem, you've ran into a roadblock, because that gives me context for what you're trying to understand rather than just a general question of what are variables, right? Okay. Kelsey, thanks for the present. Do I have any suggested for maintaining table components? Yeah, sign up for the advanced Figma course. There's a spot in there that's really robust about creating table components. They are their own animal, and the people have struggled with how to make tables for reusable table components across every imaginable UI development tool that I've had experience with. So yeah, tables are really challenging to create and maintain. I love David's question. How can we mute the damn toolbar that appears with the new UI? I'm assuming the damn toolbar you're referring to, David, is this guy down at the bottom. You can hide your interface entirely. I think there's a way to do that. Hold on, let me get out of here. Or you can just close your file. I forget the, oh wait, you know what? Let's see, hide help UI. So that doesn't do it. Hide UI. Yeah, show hide UI. There you go. Now the whole thing's gone. Doesn't really do what you're looking to, and if you hit that shortcut key by accident, I had that happen with After Effects years ago, and I lost a half a day's work trying to figure out how to get my UI back. So proceed with caution on that one, David. Miles, what type of plugins and tools do you recommend for typography? Ooh, great question. Miles, I think I know your father. I'm sure I know your father. Anyway, thanks for attending. And yeah, I don't know that plugins and tools. It's again, that's such a general question. If you had a specific problem you were trying to solve, I don't really use many plugins for typography. So the one that I have used in the past, let me see if I can get my UI back. Here we go. One I have used in the past is Font Replacer. It's a paid plugin, but it's a find and replace font plugin that's really robust in Figma. That's about the only plugin I use for typography. I would say when it comes to typography overall, make sure you're learning the basic principles of typography before you're worried about plugins or tools specifically in Figma to address your typographic needs. So none is the answer to your question, Miles. All right, Bridget, can I explain why each component needs to have the same name so I can apply it to other areas? Well, one, consistent naming is just a good practice in your files. Especially if you kind of get in the mindset of, I'm not going to be the only person who ever works on this file. So if I have to hand off this file, or, the way I actually like to think about it is I like to think about future Mel. And I try and ask myself the question, is future Mel going to understand what I've done here when he comes back to this file a month from now? And so if you kind of approach all of your naming and all your file organization from that point of view, then why naming is important becomes second nature. And why consistent naming is, and to clarify, your question is why each component has to have the same name? Not quite the case. Why each identical layer in a component should have a similar name. So that's kind of, that's my answer to that, Bridget. And then Bridget also, like Miles' questions chat, auto layout. Please give an example of when you would use hug over fill and vice versa. It's not, I'm going to give you guys the standard designer answer of it depends on this. It's really about what you're trying to accomplish. It's not necessarily you would use hug versus fill. It's you would use hug for one scenario and fill for a different scenario. Kind of a cop-out answer, but it's also a very true answer. All right, ML. You also mentioned there's a lot of confusion with auto layout. Can you give an example of, oh, okay, it's the same question. See the answer I gave Bridget. It's all contextual. If I can teach you any overall just UX design kind of principle, context, 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 context. I am a firm believer that best practices are for lazy people. They're good starting points, but you should always be considering your user and the context of the problem you're trying to solve. All right, William. I tried to use the new UI, I can't find the new UI, the little icon to make a layer into a property. For example, a text layer into an editable property. Is there a handy way to, Figma's help documentation has a great page, and if you ping me directly or email me, I don't have time to find it right now, but there's a whole page in their documentation where you can switch back and forth between the two UIs, and they show you what's moved, which is really great. It's a great way to learn the new UI, William. So I would use that. Okay, so that's all the current questions in chat. Let's look at questions. So let's go into the chat, see if I missed anything here. I think, does anyone have any other questions, or, oh, here's another question. How can I confirm that I'm using the latest UI? Great question. Let's see. I hid my help UI. So this little help guy in the bottom right, you can go back to the previous UI, or that link I was talking about, navigating Figma's new UI is right there. So William, you can just click on that guy to go to that page I was referring to earlier. All right, so that hopefully answers your question, Joel. Bridget, which auto layout settings would you suggest to make my components responsive? Oh, Bridget, you're not going to like this question, but I'd be giving away a little too much about the advanced Figma course if I dove deep into the answer to that question. So I'm going to have to defer that one, just because Emily Ann's on the call, and I don't want her to browbeat me about giving away secrets of the course. Not that she's ever browbeaten me before, but that one goes a little too deep into what the course materials. Good question, though. And yes, you do know my father. Okay. Other questions? Keep them coming. We've got a little time. Da, da, da. Any other questions? All right. Well, I think we've covered all the questions that I've seen at this point. Emily Ann, do you want to hop back in here and kind of wrap things up?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's actually a couple more over in the
Oh, okay.
tab now.
All right, cool. Let's take a look. Mel, great present. Oh, how am I using AI with Figma? Jacob is a friend of mine of umpteen years who was kind enough to join us today, and I think he's just asking me this question just to harass me. Now, how am I using AI with Figma? You know, it's really funny. One of the main uses, and it's silly, that for me with Figma is when or with AI and Figma is when I'm trying to remember a concept within Figma. AI does a really good job, specifically Google Gemini does a really good job of defining various Figma concepts in really simple terms. Of course, that's all based on your prompts, but I use it a lot for that. Also, I've used it recently where I told it the type of component that I wanted to build in Figma, and I couldn't wrap my head quite around the structure of the component I wanted to build. So I used it as kind of a digital assistant, if you will, to kind of teach me how or give me some examples of how I would go about building that component. And it really was a great idea generator for me and presented some things that I wasn't quite thinking of. So that was great from an idea generation standpoint. The other thing I've used it for in regards to Figma is a lot of times you're asked to build components that might have a lot of different names across the web. You know, like like a good one is a pill versus a chip versus what's the other one? Pills, chips, and tags, right? And those things have a variety of names across the web. And oftentimes you want to look at examples of how those have been built or designed. And you're not like taking full advantage of your research when you're looking for those things. So I'll have it list out. I'll go in and I'll say, tell me 30 different ways that 30 different names this element is called across the web. And then it gives me more fodder for my research. So those are a few of the ways that I use AI in Figma. And then I use it for a lot of, if I've got for text formatting, I guess I use it for everything. I use AI for a lot of things when it comes to just like tasks that used to be like mundane tasks that took me a lot of time because I wasn't thinking in those terms or I couldn't quite pull all of those things from my memory. So it's like it's better than Google in some ways because it can give you very definitive answers and examples, but you have to take it with a grain of salt because it's kind of like I think of it like Will Hunting from Good Will Hunting. Like it can tell you what a painting is, but it's never seen the painting, if that makes sense. Great question. Do I think it's helpful to copy existing websites to practice Figma or what? Yeah, I think it's helpful to copy any previous or good examples of any type of art or design. And here's why. Uh, I did not do that thumbs down. That was Apple going rogue on me. Just so you guys know, I don't thumbs down my own comments, generally speaking. But I think you learn a lot from copying, no matter what tool you use. What I would suggest when you're going through the copying process is start off by just grabbing a screenshot of the web of the design that you want to do and kick the opacity of it back and design directly over the top of it, and try and think about how you're going to, like, what grid systems, how did they make the decisions they've made in that design. So that's one way to do it. There are also plugins for Figma that will actually grab a website and turn it into a Figma file. Sometimes they're messy, but it's a good way to just kind of go in and see how those things are built. Another, now when you're copying websites, as you start to graduate, you can build your taste level by copying really well designed websites. But as you start to graduate, and the old adage of good artists copy, great artists steal, which was attributed to Picasso, that applies. But one of the things I've tried to do is, if you are going to borrow ideas from a different design, borrow one idea from here, a one idea from there, a one idea from there, and don't just directly ape someone else's design, because that's tacky, honestly. And it doesn't really make you a better designer. It just makes you a copier. And we have AI for that. So let AI do the copying of other artists' design, because it's going to, whether we want it to or not. And you can be original by doing mashups, which is 90% of music and art anyway. It's a mashup of something that's come before. So I hope that helps. Any other questions? No? All right. Well, Emily Ann, I think I'm going to shut up for now.
No, this was awesome. Thank you so much. This is a great presentation, really dynamic. I really appreciate everyone's questions that were thrown into the chat as well. I know I've mentioned this a few times at the beginning of the presentation and also in the chat while we were, working through everything. But just one final reminder, we have the code NewYear100. If anyone would like $100 off a Design Lab course, you can utilize that anytime up until December 31st. And I'm also going to just share our admissions email in case anybody would like to get in touch and ask questions. You can go ahead and reach out to us. We are always super happy to chat with prospective students or prior students who are maybe looking to take another course. All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Mel. Again, great presentation. We loved having you. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.